한 장을 다 읽었으니까 뭐 지난 것들을 읽어보겠습니다. 캠탈시아를 깐 기념도 되고 그 여성님께서 정리해 주신 것 활용해보기도 하는 차원에서 자, 읽어볼게요. 그냥 쭉 읽을 테니까 이제 밑에 설명 보실 분들은 보시고 그러시면 좋겠습니다. How to read a book, Week 1, Chapter 1, The Activity and Art of Reading. This is a book for readers and for those who wish to become readers. Particularly, it is for readers of books. Even more particularly, it is for those whose main purpose in reading books is to gain increased understanding. By readers, we mean people who are still accustomed to, as almost every literate and intelligent person used to be, to gain a large share of their information about and their understanding of the world from the written word. Not all of it, of course. Even in the days before radio and television, a certain amount of information and understanding was acquired through spoken words and through observation. But for intelligent and curious people, that was never enough. They knew that they had to read too, and they did read. How to read a book, Week 2. There is some feeling nowadays that reading is not as necessary as it once was. Radio and especially television have taken over many of the functions once served by print, just as photography has taken over functions once served by painting and other graphic arts. Perhaps we know more about the world than we used to, and insofar as knowledge is prerequisite to understanding, it is all to the good. But knowledge is not as much a prerequisite to understanding as is commonly supposed. We do not have to know everything about something in order to understand it. Too many facts are often as much of an obstacle to understanding as too few. There is a sense in which we moderners are inundated with facts to the detriment of understanding. One of the reasons for this situation is that the very media we have mentioned are so designed as to make thinking seem unnecessary, though this is only an appearance. The packaging of intellectual position and views is one of the most active enterprises of some of the best minds of our day. The viewer of television, the listener to radio, the reader of magazines is presented with a whole complex of elements, all the way from ingenious rhetoric to carefully selected data and statistics, to make it easy for him to make up his own mind with the minimum of difficulty and effort. But the packaging is often done so effectively that the viewer, listener, or reader does not make up his own mind at all. Instead, he inserts a packaged opinion into his mind, somewhat like inserting a cassette into a cassette player. He then pushes a button and plays back the opinion whenever it seems appropriate to do so. When it seems appropriate to do so, he has performed acceptably without having had to think. How to read a book, Week 3, Active Reading. As we said at the beginning, we will be principally concerned in these pages with the development of skill in reading books. But the rules of reading that, if followed and practiced, develop such skill can be applied. But the rules of reading that, if followed and practiced, develop such skill can be applied also to printed material in general, to any type of reading matter, to newspapers, magazines, pamphlets, articles, tracts, even advertisements. Since reading of any sort is an activity, all reading must, to some degree, be active. Completely passive reading is impossible. We cannot read with our eyes immobilized and our minds asleep. Hence, when we contrast active with passive reading, our purpose is first to call attention to the fact that reading can be more or less active. And second, to point out that the more active the reading, the better. One reader is better than another in proportion as he is capable of a greater range of activity in reading and exerts more effort. He is better if he demands more of himself and of the text before him. Though, strictly speaking, there can be no absolutely passive reading. Many people think that, as compared with writing and speaking, which are obviously active undertakings, reading and listening are entirely passive. The writer or speaker must put out some effort, but no work need be done by the reader or listener. Reading and listening are thought of as receiving communication from someone who is actively engaged in giving or sending it. The mistake here is to suppose that receiving communication is like receiving a blow or a legacy or a judgment from the court. On the contrary, the reader or listener is much more like the catcher in a game of baseball. Catching the ball is just as much an activity as pitching or hitting it. The pitcher or batter is the sender in the sense that his activity initiates the motion of the ball. The catcher or fielder is the receiver in the sense that his activity terminates it. Both are active, though the activities are different. If anything is passive, it's the ball. It is the inner thing that is put in motion or stopped, whereas the players are active, moving to pitch, hit, or catch. The analogy with writing and reading is almost perfect. The thing that is written and read, like the ball, is the passive object, common to the two activities that begin and terminate the process. We can take this analogy a step further. The art of catching is the skill of catching every kind of pitch, fastballs and curves, changeups and knucklers. Similarly, the art of reading is the skill of catching every sort of communication as well as possible. How to read a book, week 4. It is noteworthy that the pitcher and catcher 잠깐 세탁기가 완료돼가지고 잠깐 멈췄습니다. 다시 읽을게요. It is noteworthy that the pitcher and catcher are successful only to the extent that they cooperate. The relation of writer and reader is similar. The writer isn't trying not to be caught, although it sometimes seems so. Successful communication occurs in any case where what the writer wanted to have received finds its way into the reader's possession. The writer's skill and the reader's skill converge upon a common end. Admittedly, writers vary, just as pitchers do. 읽어봅시다. 오, 그래프도 나오네요. 사실 그래프를 이해해보려고 했는데 조금 어렵더라고요. 계속 읽겠습니다. Some writers have excellent control. They know exactly what they want to convey, and they convey it precisely and accurately. Other things being equal, they are easier to catch than a wild writer without control. How to read a book, week 5. There is one respect in which the analogy breaks down. The ball is a simple unit. It is either completely caught or not. A piece of writing, however, is a complex object. It can be received more or less completely, all the way from the very little of what the writer intended to the whole of it. From very little what the writer intended to the whole of it. The amount the reader catches will usually depend on the amount of activity he puts into the process. as well as upon the skill with which he executes the different mental acts involved. What does active reading entail? We will return to this question many times in this book. For the moment, it suffices to say that, given the same thing to read, one person reads it better than another, first by reading it more actively, and second by performing each of the acts involved more skillfully. These two things are related. Reading is a complex activity, just as writing is. It consists of a large number of separate acts, all of which must be performed in a good reading. The person who can perform more of them is better able to read. 여기부터는 새로운 장이죠? 네, 새로운 장은 다음 2장 끝날 때 한꺼번에 읽도록 하겠습니다. 듣느라고 수고 많으셨습니다.